The biting cold of Christmas Eve settled over the quiet suburban street, frosting the meticulously decorated houses with a layer of fresh snow. Inside, warm lights glowed, silhouettes of families moved, and the scent of pine and baking cookies seemed to hang in the crisp air. Michael, an ex-Navy SEAL, now running a successful security firm, drove slowly, the hum of his luxury SUV, a stark contrast to the silent, picturesque scene outside. He was on his way home from a late business meeting, a rare occurrence on such a night, and the festive cheer felt almost foreign to him. Then he saw her, a small, bundled-up figure, no older than 7, hunched over a trash can at the edge of a brightly lit property. She was tiny, almost swallowed by a thick hand-me-down coat, her breath misting in the cold as she rummaged through the discarded contents. The house she was next to was a showpiece, every window framed with twinkling lights, a giant inflatable Santa waving from the lawn. It was a picture of perfect, affluent celebration, jarringly out of place with the sight of the little girl. Michael's foot instinctively eased off the gas. He watched, a knot forming in his stomach. What was a child doing out here, alone on Christmas Eve, sifting through garbage? Before he could fully process the scene, the front door of the decorated house swung open. A man, well-dressed and portly, stepped out onto the porch, his face flushed, likely from too much holiday cheer. He spotted the girl. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" the man bellowed, his voice carrying clearly across the silent street. "Get away from my trash, you little street urchin trying to steal from me." The girl flinched, her small shoulders hunching even further. Her hands, red and chapped, clutched something tightly. A partially eaten candy cane, bent and sticky. She tried to melt into the shadows, but the man advanced, his voice growing louder, angrier. "This is private property. I'll call the police if you don't leave right now. Go on, get out of here, you disgrace." Michael's jaw tightened. A cold, familiar resolve settled deep in his eyes. He didn't intervene, not yet. Instead, with a practiced, fluid motion, he pulled out his phone. He angled it subtly, recording the interaction without drawing attention to himself. The man continued to scold the girl, oblivious to the silent witness in the car. The girl, her face pale in the glow of the porch lights, mumbled something inaudible, then scurried away, disappearing around the corner of the house and into the darkness. She was gone as quickly as she had appeared. The homeowner, satisfied with his display of authority, turned and re-entered his house, slamming the door shut. The festive lights continued to twinkle, the false cheer returning to the scene as if nothing had happened. Michael watched the empty space where the girl had stood. A quiet determination resonated within him. Some debts, he thought, are paid in unexpected ways. He put the car in park, the engine idling softly. He looked at the phone in his hand, the recording still playing back the man's harsh words. Then, he made a call. His voice was low, firm, and utterly devoid of holiday warmth. "I need you to look into someone for me," he instructed the unseen party on the other end. "David Miller. He lives at 1422 Sycamore Lane. And find out everything you can about a little girl, about 7 years old, in a blue coat. She was just at his house." He paused, listening. "Yes, tonight. Christmas Eve. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below." Michael's own story began far from the suburban affluence he now navigated. He grew up in a working-class neighborhood in the Midwest, a place where money was tight but community bonds were strong. His parents, a factory worker and a school secretary, instilled in him, early on, the values of hard work, honesty, and looking out for your neighbors. Christmas in their small house wasn't about lavish gifts, but about shared meals, handmade decorations, and the warmth of family. He remembered one year, when a fire destroyed a neighbor's home just before the holidays, how everyone on their street pooled what little they had to make sure that family still had a Christmas dinner and a few presents for their kids. That memory stuck with him, a quiet lesson in humanity. High school was a means to an end for Michael. He wasn't chasing popularity. He was chasing a way out, a path to serve and to build a better life than the one factory jobs offered. The military seemed like the clearest route. He pushed himself academically and physically, driven by a quiet ambition that few understood. When he finally joined the Navy, he found a purpose that resonated deeply. The SEAL training was brutal, stripping away everything but raw determination and an unshakable sense of loyalty. He learned to rely on his team, and they on him, forging bonds stronger than blood. His time in combat zones was a blur of intense focus and stark realities. He saw incredible bravery, men sacrificing everything for each other, for a mission. He also saw profound suffering, the innocent caught in conflicts they didn't understand, the lasting scars on those who survived. These experiences cemented his moral code. Protect the vulnerable, stand up for what's right, and never, ever leave a man behind. Justice wasn't just a concept. It was something you fought for, sometimes with your life. Coming back to civilian life was a different kind of war. The world felt too quiet, too soft, after the constant adrenaline and clear objectives of deployment. He struggled to find his footing, the skills that made him invaluable in combat feeling out of place in boardrooms. But the same drive that propelled him through SEAL training pushed him through this new challenge. He started small, a security consulting firm built on the principles of discipline and integrity he'd learned in the Navy. It grew, slowly at first, then rapidly, fueled by his reputation for getting things done. No excuses. He became successful, far beyond anything his childhood self could have imagined. But he never forgot where he came from. The name David Miller, the man from the Sycamore Lane house, brought a bitter taste to Michael's mouth. He knew that name. David was a couple of years older, from the same old neighborhood. His family had always been a step up, a slightly bigger house, newer cars, but David himself had always been different. Even as kids, David had an air of entitlement about him, a way of looking down on others, a casual cruelty that Michael remembered vividly. He was the kind of kid who would take your last cookie just to watch you go without, then laugh about it. David had a knack for making people feel small, a trait that seemed to have only grown stronger with age and money. Seeing David's smug face, his callous dismissal of that little girl on Christmas Eve, it hit Michael hard. It wasn't just about the girl. It was about every person David had ever looked down on, every vulnerable soul he'd ever stepped on to get ahead. Michael's life, his journey from poverty to service to success, had been shaped by a deep understanding of struggle. He carried a fierce protectiveness for anyone who couldn't protect themselves. That cold night on Sycamore Lane, watching David Miller berate a child, had stirred something far deeper than simple anger. It was a visceral reaction, a primal urge to right a wrong that felt like it had been building for decades. The memory of David Miller wasn't just about childhood slights. It was a collection of little cuts, small betrayals that, over time, had eroded any shred of genuine respect Michael might have once held for him. Even as kids, David had a way of twisting things, of making situations work for him at someone else's expense. Michael remembered one time in elementary school, a science fair project. Michael had spent weeks on a detailed volcano model, complete with working lava. David, who was in the same class, had barely lifted a finger on his own project. But when the teacher praised Michael's work, David quickly jumped in, claiming he'd helped a lot with the design ideas, even suggesting some of the more complex parts. Michael, being a quiet kid, just let it slide. But the unfairness of it stuck with him. It was a small thing, but it showed how David operated. Later, in middle school, there was a talent show. Michael had practiced a guitar piece for months, something he was really proud of. He'd confided in David about how nervous he was, but also how much he wanted to do well. On the day of the show, just before Michael was supposed to go on stage, David made a joke in front of their friends, loudly asking if Michael remembered to tune his cheap old guitar so he didn't embarrass himself. It was said with a smile, but the words were sharp, designed to chip away at Michael's confidence. Michael ended up messing up a few notes during his performance, something he rarely did during practice. He never directly blamed David, but he couldn't shake the feeling that David's comment had gotten into his head. These weren't major confrontations, just a steady drip of subtle manipulations and veiled put-downs that made Michael wary. The real breaking point, the one that left a lasting scar, happened in high school. There was a scholarship opportunity for a summer program, something both Michael and David were applying for. It was a big deal, a chance to get ahead. Michael had worked tirelessly on his application, poring over essays and gathering recommendations. He had shared some of his ideas with David, thinking they were friends, that they were both just trying their best. But David, in a move that still stung years later, somehow got access to Michael's completed application before the submission deadline. He then incorporated some of Michael's unique essay points and even a specific project idea into his own application, making it sound like his original thought. When the scholarship results came out, David got it. Michael didn't. The betrayal was crushing, not just because he lost the scholarship, but because someone he considered a friend had actively sabotaged him. He confronted David, who just shrugged it off, saying, "All's fair in love and war, right? You should have been more careful with your ideas." That conversation ended their friendship for good. After high school, their paths diverged. Michael went into the military, while David went to a decent state university. Michael heard about David sometimes, through mutual acquaintances, always about how well he was doing, how he was making connections. When Michael returned from the service and started his own business, he'd occasionally run into David at networking events or in passing around town. David would always be impeccably dressed, full of boastful stories about his latest deals and investments, always managing to weave in a subtle belittling comment about Michael's humble beginnings, or how tough it must have been to start from scratch. He'd act like he was being supportive, but his eyes would always hold that familiar, condescending gleam. Michael usually just smiled, nodded, and moved on, knowing there was no point in engaging. So, when Michael saw David Miller, older but still with that same entitled smirk, berating a small, shivering child on Christmas Eve, it wasn't just a random act of cruelty. It was the last straw that had been building for decades. It was the culmination of every broken promise, every subtle manipulation, every belittling remark. It was David, being David. But this time, his target was completely innocent and defenseless. The image of that little girl, clutching a discarded candy cane, facing David's cold dismissal, pushed Michael past his breaking point. This wasn't just about getting even for past wrongs. It was about stopping a pattern of behavior that was deeply ingrained and fundamentally unjust. David's actions that night weren't an anomaly. They were the most egregious manifestation of a character flaw Michael had known for a lifetime. The emotional atmosphere around Michael tightened, almost suffocating him. The image of the little girl, small and vulnerable in the snow, her tiny hands clutching that candy cane, was burned into his mind. He couldn't shake it. It pushed him to act, to finally dig deeper into David Miller's life, beyond the surface of their shared, troubled past. Michael started by asking around, subtly at first, among old acquaintances and business contacts who might have crossed paths with David. What he found wasn't entirely surprising, but it filled in the gaps. David, it turned out, was outwardly very successful. He owned several properties, drove expensive cars, and was a prominent figure in some local charities, always ensuring his name was front and center. He was known for throwing lavish parties and contributing generously to political campaigns, which bought him a certain level of respect and influence in the community. People often spoke of his sharp business sense and his ability to make money. However, beneath this polished exterior, a different story emerged. Whispers followed David. People talked about how he ran his businesses, often cutting corners, pushing boundaries, and sometimes outright exploiting loopholes. Employees spoke of his harsh management style, his tendency to take credit for others' work, and his quickness to fire anyone who challenged him. Neighbors, while never openly criticizing him, would often mention his arrogance, his lack of consideration, and a general feeling that he believed himself above everyone else. They avoided direct confrontations, preferring to grumble behind his back rather than deal with his temper. It became clear that David had a history of exploiting others, not just strangers, but even people he knew, sometimes even within his own extended family. The details were vague, but the pattern was undeniable. The more Michael learned, the more the pressure on him intensified. He felt the heavy weight of potential judgment. David was, to most people, an upstanding citizen, a pillar of the community. Taking action against someone like that, even with good reason, could backfire dramatically. Michael wrestled with this internal conflict. He wanted justice for that little girl, and for all the past slights, but he also had to consider the social repercussions, the potential damage to his own reputation, and the fight he knew David would put up. He wasn't afraid of a fight, but he had to be smart about it. His observations of David also continued. Michael noticed how David's demeanor worsened, especially when he was around people he considered beneath him. He saw him in a restaurant, dismissive and rude to a waitress. He heard him on the phone, talking down to someone, his voice dripping with condescension. It wasn't just a one-off thing on Christmas Eve. It was a deeply ingrained part of who David was. This confirmed Michael's initial assessment. David truly believed he was entitled to treat people however he wanted, especially if they lacked power or status. This reinforced Michael's conviction that action was not just necessary, but essential. The emotional suffocation grew. Michael felt the weight of years of David's behavior, layered with the fresh, stinging memory of the cruelty witnessed on Christmas Eve. He realized that simply ignoring it, as he had so many times before, was no longer an option. The thought of letting David continue his pattern, unchecked, was unbearable. It created a profound sense of emotional burden, a heavy knot in his stomach. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that a confrontation was inevitable. The question wasn't if, but when and how. He needed to be absolutely sure of his next move. Then, the turning point came. Michael finally discovered the full, devastating truth about the little girl. Her name was Lily. She wasn't just a random child on the street. She was David's niece. Lily's parents, David's sister and brother-in-law, had recently lost everything. A series of bad breaks, starting with a serious medical emergency, had spiraled into job losses and eventually the loss of their home. They were destitute, living in a small, cramped shelter on the other side of town. What truly shocked Michael was David's direct involvement in their misfortune. David, her wealthy uncle, had not only refused to help them when they first asked, but he had actually made things worse. He owned a small, run-down rental property that Lily's family had been living in for years. When they fell behind on rent after the job losses, David, without hesitation, evicted them. He didn't offer any grace period, no understanding, just a cold, legal eviction notice. He even threatened them with legal action for damages if they didn't leave immediately. It was a calculated move, designed to assert his power and show them who was in charge, even though he knew they had nowhere else to go. The realization hit Michael like a physical blow. Lily wasn't scavenging for herself alone. She was looking for anything, absolutely anything, that might make her younger brother's Christmas a little bit brighter. Her brother, only 4 years old, was obsessed with candy canes. Lily had been sent away from David's brightly lit warm house on Christmas Eve, with nothing, not even a kind word. She just wanted to find one small, discarded treat to bring a tiny bit of joy to her brother. The half-eaten candy cane she clutched that night wasn't for her. It was a desperate, heartbreaking attempt to hold on to some shred of Christmas magic for someone she loved. David's public image, the one he so carefully cultivated as a successful businessman and community pillar, was a complete and utter lie. It was a facade built on manipulation, exploitation, and a staggering lack of human decency. He presented himself as a generous philanthropist, but in reality, he was a cruel, self-serving man who would step on his own family to maintain his illusion of superiority. The stories Michael had heard, the vague whispers of David exploiting others, suddenly clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just a selfish act. It was a deep-seated pattern of behavior that knew no bounds, not even family. This devastating revelation solidified Michael's resolve completely. Any lingering hesitation, any doubt about potential social repercussions, vanished instantly. This wasn't just about a personal grudge or a minor injustice. This was about exposing a monster who preyed on the vulnerable, even his own flesh and blood. He decided, with unwavering certainty, that he would expose David's hypocrisy and cruelty, not just for Lily and her family, but for every single person David had ever wronged. Michael leveraged his extensive network, the one he had built over years in the military and in his security consulting firm. He called in favors, reached out to contacts, and began meticulously planning his next steps. This wasn't going to be a simple confrontation. It was going to be a strategic dismantle. He had the video, the proof of David's coldness towards Lily. Now, he had the motive and the backstory, the full, ugly truth. This discovery shattered any remaining doubt Michael had. The cycle of David's unchallenged malice, his ability to inflict pain and get away with it, was about to be broken. The narrative shifted dramatically in Michael's mind, from mere observation to strategic, calculated action. Justice wasn't just a concept anymore. It was a mission. Michael initiated his plan with precision, a silent storm brewing in the quiet suburban town. The recorded video of David's cruel interaction with Lily, the little girl, was the first domino to fall. He combined this damning footage with irrefutable evidence he'd meticulously gathered. David's financial malpractices, the shady dealings that propped up his business, and most damning of all, the documented neglect of his own family. It was a comprehensive dossier, painting a stark picture of a man whose public image was a carefully constructed lie. He didn't make a grand announcement. Instead, Michael discreetly leaked the information. A carefully curated package went to a local investigative journalist, known for their tenacity. Another, equally detailed, found its way to the relevant authorities, the district attorney's office, and even a financial regulatory body. The goal was not a quick splash, but a thorough, undeniable exposure that would unravel David's life thread by thread. During this period, Michael wrestled with a complex mix of emotions. There was a fierce, righteous anger that fueled his every move, a certainty that what he was doing was fundamentally right. Yet beneath that conviction, fear gnawed at him. He knew David was a vindictive man, capable of striking back. Doubt crept in during the quiet hours of the night. Was he going too far? What if he was wrong, even in some small detail? The potential backlash was real, not just for him, but for Lily and her family, who were already so vulnerable. He faced moments of profound emotional exhaustion, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He wasn't a vigilante, but a man seeking justice, and the line sometimes felt blurry. He would often stare at the ceiling, replaying the Christmas Eve scene, Lily's tiny shivering form, David's sneering face. Each memory rekindled his resolve, pushing the doubt back into the shadows. As the leaks began to surface, the local community reacted with a mixture of shock and outrage. David, who had cultivated an image of success and generosity, was suddenly exposed as a ruthless opportunist. The initial news stories, carefully worded but hinting at deeper truths, caused a ripple of unease. Then, as more details emerged about his treatment of Lily and her family, the whispers turned into a roar of condemnation. Some of David's former associates, people who had been quietly wronged or intimidated by him over the years, found new courage. Emboldened by the public outcry, they secretly reached out to Michael or the media, offering their own incriminating evidence. These were the hushed stories of unpaid debts, broken contracts, and manipulative business practices that had been suppressed for years. Their contributions added layers to the growing mountain of proof against David. However, not everyone turned against him immediately. There were those who had benefited from David's influence, either through business deals or social connections. They attempted to defend him, dismissing the accusations as rumors or a smear campaign. Some even tried to discredit Michael, suggesting he had a personal vendetta. But their efforts were quickly overshadowed by the sheer volume of evidence and the raw emotional impact of Lily's story. The cultural dynamics of the American Midwest played a significant role in how the community reacted. In this region, there's a strong emphasis on family values, loyalty, and community support. David's actions towards his own niece, especially during Christmas, were seen as a profound betrayal of these core tenets. The local news, sensing the public's intense interest, extensively covered the unfolding scandal. They highlighted the stark contrast between David's carefully curated public persona, the smiling benefactor, the successful businessman, and the cold, unfeeling man who would evict his own family and leave a child to search for scraps. The psychological impact of these events was profound for both Michael and David. Michael, despite his internal struggles, felt a growing sense of vindication. The weight of his decision was immense, but he saw the truth finally coming to light, and that brought a strange kind of relief. For David, however, the world he had so meticulously built began to crumble. He faced public humiliation. His name dragged through the mud, his reputation shattered. Legal repercussions loomed large, and his carefully constructed life started to unravel with terrifying speed. The mask was off, and everyone could see the true face beneath. The world Michael had helped to dismantle around David now lay in ruins. David's business ventures, once seemingly untouchable, collapsed under the intense scrutiny of auditors and investigators. The financial malpractices that had fueled his lavish lifestyle were laid bare, leading to a cascade of legal charges for fraud, embezzlement, and unethical business practices. His carefully constructed empire, built on deceit and exploitation, crumbled to dust. His reputation, once a shield, became a brand of shame. He was no longer the respected businessman, but a pariah, losing everything he had so ruthlessly accumulated. For Michael, there was a quiet satisfaction, a sense of justice finally served. He began to reestablish a sense of peace that had been disturbed since that cold Christmas Eve. The turmoil of confrontation and exposure slowly gave way to a more tranquil rhythm. He didn't gloat, but he observed the unfolding consequences for David with a steady gaze, knowing that his actions, though difficult, had been necessary. The little girl, Lily, and her family, who had been cast out into the cold, now experienced an outpouring of community support. Moved by their story, neighbors, churches, and local charities rallied around them. Michael, true to his nature, remained anonymous in his direct assistance. Through a network of trusted contacts, he ensured they received significant financial aid, allowing them to secure a safe and warm home. He also helped set up educational opportunities for Lily and her younger brother. He watched their recovery from a distance, seeing the color return to Lily's cheeks, the hopeful sparkle in her eyes. It was a quiet triumph, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest moments, compassion could bloom. Justice, he realized, wasn't just about punishment, it was also about restoration. David's final consequence was a stark and lonely one. Stripped of his former grandeur, his expensive suits replaced by the drab attire of legal proceedings, he was seen isolated and disgraced. The grand house, once a symbol of his success, was foreclosed upon. His former associates avoided him. His few remaining friends vanished. He was utterly alone, a stark contrast to the thriving, supportive community that had come together to lift up Lily's family. He had pursued wealth and status at the expense of human decency, and now he paid the price in solitude and public scorn. Michael reflected on the long journey, from his humble beginnings to his time as a SEAL, and finally to this moment. He understood that the true meaning of justice and compassion wasn't always found in grand gestures or dramatic battles. Sometimes it was in the calculated, ethical action taken by one person who refused to look away. He realized that his greatest strength lay not just in his training or his business acumen, but in his unwavering moral compass. He found a renewed purpose, not just in his security consulting, but in quietly advocating for the vulnerable, ensuring that those who exploited others faced accountability. The narrative concluded with a sense of closure, but also hope. The community, bruised but ultimately stronger, healed from the exposure of David's deceit. The wronged were uplifted, their lives slowly mended, and David faced a fitting, realistic consequence for his cruelty. The ex-Navy SEAL, Michael, having upheld his deep-seated moral code, moved forward. He was a quiet guardian of justice, always watching, always ready to act when the vulnerable needed a voice. A protector. His actions had not only brought an end to David's reign of quiet terror, but had also shown the power of one person to make a profound difference. ensuring that kindness, even in a harsh world, could still prevail.